All right, good evening, YouTube. Thank you for coming to my channel. And for those who have subbed, thank you for subbing to my channel. Thank you for watching my videos. I appreciate it. Now, I haven't done this in a minute. I was reading some religious texts. I read the book of Job. There's a playlist for that. I read um, about Joseph. There's a playlist for that. And then I read the book of Jonah. I think I created a separate playlist for that. And I said I want to read some more religious texts, but I hadn't gotten to it because I just hadn't. But this is a story that I want to read here, okay? Back to a religious text from the Nag Hammadi Library. Now, for those, I'm sure some of you watching this are familiar with the name I'm about to mention, Bobby Hemmett. Oh my goodness, listen, honey. I saw him about 4 times here in Cleveland, Ohio, 3 or 4 times here in Cleveland, Ohio, live lecturing. First time I had no clue who he was. A friend of mine told me about him. A young lady told me about him from the Hebrew community that I used to study with. Now, I used to study with the African Hebrew Israelites of Jerusalem, who was founded by, one of the founders was Ben Ami. All right, so for those of you who are familiar, because there are a few different religious Hebrew communities out there. That's the one that I was a part of. I was not a part of the ones where you typically see them on the corner, street corner, quote unquote, preaching, okay, for lack of a better word. I'm not familiar with that community. But nevertheless, I left the community. This young lady, she had left the community a little bit before I did. She called me one night. She said, girl, Bobby Hemmett is going to be here. What was this like? This was before I had my daughter, 2003. I was like, who? I had never heard of him before, And she told me a little bit, and I was like, okay, I'll go. And it was a Saturday. It was at a church here. It was an African-centered church. I can't remember the name of it, and I don't even think it operates anymore. But listen, I think that lecture started at 3 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, something like that. We were there till 11, and I could not get enough. But a lot of the stuff at that time, I really didn't know what he was saying. You know what I mean? I didn't understand it, but it was things I had never heard of back then. Some of it, not all of it. Definitely the spiritual component, okay? But I was very drawn to it. I was taken in. I just had a great time. And the next time he came, of course, I was there. The next time he came, I was there, okay? And it was like 4 times. That was the first time. The second time he came, the night before we had an Egyptian bookstore here, and he spoke at the Egyptian bookstores. That was a very small, intimate setting. A lot of people didn't know about it. I don't even remember how I found out, but nevertheless, I went to that, and then I went to see him lecture the next day, and then the last time I saw him here was at a bookstore. And anyway, I'm thinking about because when he would lecture, I mean, you watch him on YouTube, you see how long it is, his lectures, when they're not broken apart. But this particular time, so it was all, of course, it was all day, all night. They had dinners, but for some reason, his dinner got messed up, and they didn't have one for him. So I gave him mine. Okay, so that's my intimate interaction with Bobby Hemmett. Okay, but nevertheless, those were the only times I saw him live. He's been to Cleveland quite a bit. Okay, and then I would just watch him on YouTube a lot, and over the years, of course, through studying and being more in tune with myself and my own spiritual self-work or whatever, I began to understand a lot more what he was saying. However, anybody watching him, the scholar that he is, how very well read he is, how very well studied he is. So, of course, I couldn't get every book that he would mention. I mean, please, but of course I had heard of the Nag Hammadi, because I went to seminary. Okay, for those of you who don't know, I have a Master's of Divinity degree from the Interdenominational Theological Center in Atlanta, Georgia, which is part of the Atlanta University Center. It's right over there by Morris Brown. Okay, on the other side of where Spelman and Morehouse is and Clark, it's on the other side. But on the same side Morris Brown is on. But anyway, so of course I heard of the Nag Hammadi from being in seminary. But it wasn't anything that I picked up. It wasn't anything that I read. It wasn't even a book that we were required to have. We were required to have the apocryphal books. So I did have that. But nevertheless, but my very first semester in seminary, my class was the History of Christianity. I believe that was the name of it. I believe, or Introduction to Christianity, I think. But nevertheless, my professor, he talked about Gnosticism a lot. Okay. And of course, he talked about the Nag Hammadi. Well, then, listen to Bobby Hemming. I was like, let me order this, okay? So I got this quite a few years ago. And I got it because, of course, he would always talk about what I'm going to read it tonight, Yaldabaoth, all right? And I had never, heard that. Even though my professor would talk about Gnosticism, I don't remember that story. Okay, so if you're not familiar with it, we're going to get into it. This was the main reason, and this was the specific one that Bobby Hemming recommended. So we are going to read that story tonight. I read that story as soon as I got this book. I read this story, okay, and I think I got this probably about 10 years ago. All right, now I read the story, and I really liked it. Okay, it was just rich, very enriching to my soul. All right. So I'm going to read it. I started to read another one of the texts in here, but I got offended by some of the language. So I put it down, and I just never picked it back up. Okay. But anyway, the Nag Hammadi Library. This is the revised edition. The definitive new translation of the Gnostic Scriptures, complete in one volume. James M. Robinson, General Editor. All right. Now, for those of you out there who may say, well, what is Gnosticism? I'm just going to read this real quick off of, and I am reading it off Wikipedia. Okay, Gnosticism. Okay. It is Greek. It means having knowledge. It is a collection of religious ideas and systems which coalesced in the late 1st century AD among Jewish and early Christian sects. These various groups emphasize personal spiritual knowledge, gnosis, above the orthodox teachings, traditions, and authority of religious institutions. Gnostic cosmogony generally presents a distinction between a supreme hidden God and a malevolent lesser divinity. Now listen. Now this malevolent lesser divinity sometimes is associated with the Yahweh of the Old Testament, or the God of the Old Testament that goes by the name of YHWH, or Yahweh. I'm not getting to the pronunciation. Like when I was with the Hebrews, we would say Yahweh. Yeah, okay. Various pronunciations, okay. But anyway, who is responsible. Now, this malevolent lesser divinity is responsible for creating the material universe. Consequently, Gnostics considered material existence flawed or evil. This Maya, this illusion, okay, it's flawed, evil, and held the principal element of salvation to be direct knowledge of the hidden divinity. Attained how? Attained via mystical or esoteric insight. Many Gnostic texts deal not in concepts of sin and repentance, but with illusion and enlightenment. All right, there is some belief in some circles that, Jesus was a Gnostic. All right. Now, that's all I'm going to read from there. All right. We're going to get in this one story I want to read is on the origin of the world. Now, I'm going to read this long-ass introduction, all right? Now, it may bore you to tears. I'm going to read this introduction, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do it just like when I read the other text. I'm not going to read the whole thing in one sitting. I'm going to read this introduction, and depend on how my tongue feels. Okay, when I get done reading this, we'll determine if I will continue on. If I do not, this will probably be if I continue on, it'll be in 2 parts. If I don't, it'll be in 3 parts. Okay, but let's get into it here. On the origin of the world, introduced by Hans Gebhard Bethge. I don't know how to pronounce it. All right, and it is translated by him and Bentley Layton, Societas Coptica. I cannot read. Hierosolimitana. Okay, Limitana. All right, the text of this tractate is quite well preserved. It is a compendium of central Gnostic ideas, especially on cosmogony, anthropogeny, and eschatology. Based on various sources and traditions, the treatise is in part presented in a semi scholarly style with numerous etiologies and etymologies. It is in the form of an apologetic tract designed for public effectiveness in attracting adherents. Earthly history, but also the presentation of the world above, including its development, are largely ignored. On the basis of unnamed and unknown author's intention stated at the beginning and then carried through in the text itself, scholarship has assigned the document the hypothetical title, On the Origin of the World. Okay. Oh. There are good reasons to assume that we have to do with a wait a minute, let me see. There are good reasons to assume that we have to do with a conscious, well-planned literary composition without extensive secondary alterations, rather than with the product of a rather long process in the transmission of tradition. The early 4th century could possibly be the time of composition. The remarkable mixture of various kinds of Jewish views, Manichaean elements, Christian ideas, Greek philosophical conceptions, and figures of Greek or Hellenistic mythology, magic, and astrology, as well as a clear emphasis on Egyptian thought, all point to Alexandria as the probable place of origin for the Greek original of On the Origin of the World. The process of translating into Coptic may have involved several stages. The seemingly corrupt condition of many passages that invite emendation, along with other difficult, often barely intelligible parts, could be explained by assuming that the text as it lies before us still represents a provisional stage in the process of translation. On the Origin of the World would thus be an opus imperfectum. The author uses various sources of tradition, some Gnostic, some not, that are difficult to divine more closely in terms of literary criticism, much less to reconstruct. In the process, there are occasional tensions, unevenness, and contradictions, since at least a few of these traditions or works presuppose a very special system all on their own or contain other tendencies, for example, Scythian or Valentinian or even Manichaean. On the Origin of the World itself offers no closed system of its own, nor does it represent one of the known Gnostic systems. The author works with direct or indirect quotations, references, summaries, explanations, and etymologies, which stand in sharp contrast to the otherwise dominant narrative style. This way of working, defending one's own view by appeal or reference to other works, is intended as a demonstration of a substantive and convincing argumentation. On the Origin of the World has many parallels with the hypostasis of the archons. The hypostasis of the archons is a story that comes before On the Origin of the World in this text, which I did read that about a month ago because I was looking for this story. All right, so they are similar, indicating a close relation between the two texts. Yet the dissimilar nature of both documents, the diverging worldviews, and numerous differences in details indicate that direct literary relationships are rather improbable. The parallelism probably results from the use of the same source material. The cosmology and anthropogeny that follow upon the semi-philosophical beginnings are in part oriented to Genesis 1 and 2, but beyond that, to concepts such as those known from Jubilees or the Enoch literature. In general, characteristically, Jewish influences dominate in the angelology, demonology, and eschatology, as well as the etymologies. The Gnostic reinterpretation of the received material varies considerably. It extends from complete reevaluation in the case of the demiurge's presumption, okay, and what took place in Genesis 3, onto relatively unbroken appropriation of Jewish ideas and motifs, such as the presentation of paradise. Yeah, I'm just stop, and it just made me think of when I was in seminary. These words, eschatology, blah blah blah, 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 ology. And I went to seminary. I was like 28. Okay, the majority of people in seminary were middle age and above. It was very few young people, like my age or young, like right out of college. I wish that I would have appreciated it more, um, Well, of course, 50 years old. Hey, this is what happens. Oh, shit. I wish I would have appreciated more than I did. But nevertheless, the primordial history emphasizes the creation of the earthly man by the archons in connection with the doctrine of the primal man, which to be sure is hard to understand due to varying motifs and heterogeneous concepts. On the other hand, the primordial history initiates already the story of redemption on the part of Pistis Sophia or Sophia Zoe, or Zoe, who are encountered or act in various ways. In this complex soteriology, however, Jesus Christ has no central function, but rather a marginal role. For these reasons, On the Origin of the World belongs to the Gnostic Nag Hammadi texts that are essentially non-Christian. On the Origin of the World is oriented toward universal eschatology. This is shown by the many allusions to the end, as well as by the broad presentation of the final events with a massive appropriation of thoughts, terms, and motifs from apocalypticism. The final state brought about by the higher world, distinguishing the redemption of the Gnostics from the destruction of the creation together with its creator, surpasses the primal condition and renders impossible a repetition of events such as these presented in On the Origin of the World. On the Origin of the World is a significant Gnostic work. We attain through this relatively long document a good insight into an educated author's thinking, work habits, and argumentation on fundamental themes. Furthermore, On the Origin of the World shows to what a high degree and with what freedom and authority a Gnostic author makes use of foreign, even non-Gnostic and heterogeneous thoughts. It thus attests the greater importance ascribed to the Gnostic stance toward the world and existence than to its mythological formulation. On the Origin of the World can help us understand how the Gnostic worldview, in debate with other intellectual currents, but also making use of them, could maintain itself, or perhaps at times even win the field. Now, of course, this is not the introduction by the Gnostics, obviously. All right, now let's get into this story On the Origin of the World. I'm gonna get some water. Sorry about that, people. Oh, Lord. All right, let's get into it. On the Origin of the World. Seeing that everybody, gods of the world, and mankind says that nothing existed prior to chaos, I, in distinction to them, shall demonstrate that they are all mistaken, because they are not acquainted with the origin of chaos, nor with its root. Here is the demonstration. How well it suits all men on the subject of chaos to say that it is a kind of darkness. But in fact, it comes from a shadow which has been called by the name darkness. And the shadow comes from a product that has existed since the beginning. It is moreover clear that it existed before chaos came into being, and that the latter is posterior to the first product. Okay. All right. The shadow comes from a product that has existed. Okay. He says, in fact, it comes from a shadow which has been called by the name darkness. And the shadow comes from a product that has existed since the beginning. The darkness comes from a product that has existed since the beginning. It is clear it existed before chaos came into being. All right. Let us therefore concern ourselves with the facts of the matter, and furthermore with the first product from which chaos was projected. And in this way the truth will be clearly demonstrated. After the natural structure of the immortal beings had completely developed out of the infinite, a likeness then emanated from pistis, faith. It is called Sophia, wisdom. It exercised volition and became a product resembling the primeval light. And immediately her will manifested itself as a likeness of heaven, having an unimaginable magnitude. It was between the immortal beings and those things that came into being after them, like she, Sophia, functioned as a veil dividing mankind from the things above. Now, the eternal realm, or the aeon of truth, has no shadow outside it, for the limitless light is everywhere within it. Okay. But its exterior is a shadow which has been called by the name darkness. Look, come on now. I love it. Oh my God. From it there appeared a force presiding over the darkness. Okay. And the forces that came into being subsequent to them called the shadow, the limitless chaos. From it, every kind of divinities sprouted up together with the entire place, so that also shadow is posterior to the first product. The shadow or the darkness is posterior to the first product. Something here before the darkness, or the shadow, which is being called the darkness. It was in the abyss that it, or the shadow, appeared, deriving from the aforementioned pistis. Then shadow perceived that there was something mightier than it, and felt envy. And when it had become pregnant of its own accord, suddenly it engendered jealousy. Since that day, the principle of jealousy amongst all the eternal realms in their world has been apparent. Lord, don't we know it? Okay. Now, as for that jealousy, it was found to be an abortion without any spirit in it. Like a shadow, it came into existence in a vast watery substance. Then the bile that had come into being out of the shadow was thrown into a part of chaos. Since that day, a watery substance has been apparent. And what sank within it flowed away, being visible in chaos. As with a woman giving birth to a child, all her superfluities flow out. Just so, matter came into being out of shadow and was projected apart, and it did not depart from chaos. Rather, matter was in chaos, being in a part of it. And when these things had come to pass, then pistis came and appeared over the matter of chaos, which had been expelled like an aborted fetus. Look at this, honey. Since there was no spirit in it. For all of it was limitless darkness and bottomless water. Now, you know what the ancients call what we call space and all that. The ancient waters. No, what they call it? The ancients call it, oh my God. What waters? I can't think of right now. Okay. But it's all water. Okay. Now, when Pistis saw what had resulted from her defect, she became disturbed, okay? She brought forth this thing, okay, by herself. When Pistis saw what had resulted from her defect, she became disturbed. And the disturbance appeared as a fearful, now we done heard two words. And the disturbance appeared as a fearful product. It rushed to her in the chaos. Now what's the two words? Jealous and fearful. He's a jealous God. Okay. And fearful, we hear that too often. Not that it in reference in some way, shape, or form to this God. What did it say? Hold on. Let me find it. This lesser divinity who is responsible for creating the material universe, and we're going to see that. She turned to it and blew into its face in the abyss, which is what? Below all the heavens. And when Pistis Sophia desired to cause the thing that had no spirit to be formed into a likeness, and to rule over matter and over all her forces, there appeared for the first time a ruler out of the waters, lion-like in appearance, androgynous, having great authority within him, and ignorant of whence he had come into being. Now when Pistis Sophia saw him moving about in the depths of the waters, she said to him, "Child, pass through to here," whose equivalent is yaldabaoth. Child. Since that day there appeared the principle of verbal expression, which reached the gods and the angels and mankind. And what came into being as a result of verbal expression, the gods and the angels and mankind finished. Now as for the ruler Yaldabaoth, he is ignorant of the force of Pistis. He did not see her face, rather he saw in the water the likeness that spoke with him. And because of that voice, he called himself Yaldabaoth. But Ariel is what the perfect call him, for he was like a lion. Now when he had come to have authority over matter, illusion, Maya, Pistis Sophia withdrew up to her light. When the ruler saw his magnitude, and it was only himself. Now this is thing that she done brought forth now by herself, that she was disturbed by. When the ruler saw his magnitude, and it was only himself that he saw nothing else except for water. This stuff that came from about of her when he came forth, when she birthed him. He saw nothing else except for water and darkness. Then he supposed that he was alone who existed. His, etc., etc., etc. You know, this is old text here, so it's kind of jumpy. You heard the introduction. Okay, some stuff is missing. Was completed by verbal expression. It appeared as a spirit moving to and fro upon the waters. And when that spirit appeared, the ruler set apart the watery substance. And what was dry was divided into another place. And from matter he made for himself an abode, and he called it heaven. Matter, which is still what? Matter. And from matter, the ruler made a footstool, and he called it what? Earth. Next, the ruler had a thought consistent with his nature. And by means of verbal expression, he created an androgyne. Next, the ruler had a thought. This ruler, this thing she made that she was disturbed by. He had a thought consistent with nature, with his nature. He had a thought that was consistent with his nature. This thing she was disturbed by. This child. Lesser divinity. And by means of verbal expression, he created an androgyne. He opened his mouth and cooed to him. The ruler had a thought consistent with his nature, and by means of verbal expression, he created an androgyne. Something made in his own image. He had a thought that was consistent with his nature and created out of it. He opened his mouth and cooed to him. When his eyes had been opened, he looked at his father, and he said to him, "E." Then his father called him E-I-O, or Yao. Next, he created the second son. He cooed to him, and he opened his eyes and said to his father, Eh. His father called him Eloi. Next, he created the third son. He cooed to him, and he opened his eyes and said to his father, As. His father called him Astaphios. These are the three sons of their father. 7 appeared in chaos, androgynous. They have their masculine names and their feminine names. The feminine name is Pronoia, forethought, Sambathis, which is weak, and his son is called Yao. His feminine name is lordship. Sabaoth, his feminine name is deity. Adonios, his feminine name is kingship. Eloios, his feminine name is jealousy. Ios, his feminine name is wealth. And Astaphios, his feminine name is Sophia, or wisdom. These are the 7 forces of the 7 heavens of chaos. And they were born androgynous, consistent with the immortal pattern that existed before them according to the wish of Pistis, so that the likeness of what had existed since the beginning might reign to the end. You will find the effect of these names and the force of the male entities in the archangelic book of the prophet Moses, and the names of the female entities in the book or Biblos of Noriah. Now the prime parent Yaldabaoth, since he possessed great authorities, created heavens for each of his offspring through what? Verbal expression. Created them beautiful as dwelling places, and in each heaven, and I can't remember which prophet talked about the 7 heavens in the New Testament. Didn't he reach the 8th? Somebody know out there, okay? And in each heaven he created great glories, 7 times excellent, thrones and mansions and temples, and also chariots and virgin spirits up to an invisible one, and their glories each one has these in his heaven, mighty armies of gods and lords and angels and archangels, countless myriads, so that they might serve. The account of these matters you will find in a precise manner in the first account of Oriah. And they were completed from this heaven to as far up as the 6th heaven, namely that of Sophia. The heaven and his earth were destroyed by the troublemaker that was below them all. And the 6 heavens shook violently, for the forces of chaos knew who it was that had destroyed the heaven that was below them. And when Pistis knew about the breakage resulting from the disturbance, she sent forth her breath and bound him and cast him down into Tartaros. Since that day, the heaven, along with its earth, has consolidated itself through Sophia, the daughter of Yaldabaoth, she who is below them all. Now, don't confuse that with Pistis Sophia, who birthed him. Remember, we talked about the son, this third son, okay, as Astaphios, but his feminine name is Sophia. Don't confuse that with the Pistis Sophia, okay, who birthed Yaldabaoth. Now, when the heavens had consolidated themselves along with their forces and all their administration, the prime parent became insolent, and he was honored by all the armies of angels, and all the gods and their angels gave blessing and honor to him. And for his part, he was delighted and continually boasted, saying to them, I have no need of anyone. He said, it is I who am God, and there is no other one that exists apart from me. And when he said this, he sinned against all the immortal beings who give answer, and they laid it to his charge. Then when Pistis saw the impiety of the chief ruler, she was filled with anger. When Pistis saw the impiety of what she had created, she was the child. She was filled with anger. The child who she was disturbed by, who created out of matter heaven, and his footstool earth, matter. When Pistis saw the impiety of the chief ruler, she was filled with anger. She was invisible. She said, "You are mistaken, Samael." Samael is fool. That is blind God. There is an immortal man of light who has been in existence before you and who will appear among your modeled forms. He will trample you to scorn just as potter's clay is pounded, and you will descend to your mother, the abyss, along with those that belong to you. Oh, let that he had created them sons and all them mansions and other heavens and places and angels and all of that. Okay? For at the consummation of your works, the entire defect that has become visible out of the truth will be abolished, and it will cease to be and will be like what has never been. Saying this, Pistis revealed her likeness and her greatness in the waters. And so doing, she withdrew up to her light. She left them. What she said? "You are mistaken, Samael, blind God." What did he say? "It is I who am God, and there is no other one that exists." See, he was a problem. There was something wrong with him when he was born, probably before. He had no understanding. His child, she called him. Yet she created him. Okay, there's more reading to be done, right? Now, when Sabaoth, the son of Yaldabaoth, heard the voice of Pistis, okay, when his son heard his grandmama, okay, the voice of Pistis, he sang praises to her and he condemned the father at the word of Pistis, and he praised her because she had instructed them about the immortal man and his light. The one that existed, the one that is. What did she say? There is an immortal man of light who has been in existence before you. And when his son, Yaldabaoth's son, heard this, he praised the Pistis, hearing about this immortal man that existed before him that created him. Then when Pistis Sophia stretched out her finger and poured upon him some light from her light, okay, she gave him some light now to be a condemnation of his father. Then when Sabaoth was illumined, he received great authority against all the forces of chaos. Since that day, he has been called Lord of the forces. He hated his father, the darkness, and his mother, the abyss, and loathed his sister, the thought of the prime parent which moved to and fro upon the waters. And because of his light, all the authorities of chaos were jealous of him. And when they had become disturbed, they made a great war in the seven heavens. Then when Pistis Sophia had seen the war, she dispatched 7 archangels to Sabaoth from her light. They snatched him up to the 7th heaven. They stood before him as attendants. Furthermore, she sent him 3 more archangels and established the kingdom for him over everyone, so that he might dwell above the 12 gods of chaos. Now when Sabaoth had taken up the place of repose in return for his repentance, Pistis also gave him her daughter Zoe, life, together with great authority, so that she might instruct him about all the things that exist in the 8th heaven. And he had authority. He made himself, first of all, a mansion. It is huge, magnificent, 7 times as great as all those that exist in the 7 heavens, which the child had made. Yaldabaoth. And before his mansion he created a throne, which was huge and was upon a 4-faced chariot called cherubim. Now the cherubim has 8 shapes per each of the 4 corners, lion forms and calf forms and human forms and eagle forms. Where do you see that, tarot readers? Come on now. What card? I'll read it again. Now, wait a minute. This is Sabaoth. Sabaoth, the son of Yaldabaoth, who was glad to hear about this immortal man who existed before his father. So she gave him, Pistis Sophia gave Sabaoth some of her light and made him over all that his father had created. Okay? She gave him her daughter together with great authority so that she might instruct him about all the things that exist in the eighth heaven. Remember, Yaldabaoth only created 7. I think I got that right. And he had authority. He made himself the mansion and blah, blah, blah. And before his mansion, what did he create, y'all? He created a throne, which was huge and was upon a 4-faced chariot called cherubim. Now the cherubim has 8 shapes per each of the 4 corners. Come on. Lion forms and calf forms and human forms and eagle forms. World card. And he created 7 women. Eagle form, so that all the forms amount to 64 forms. And he created 7 archangels that stand before it. He is the 8th and has authority. All the forms amount to 72. Furthermore, from this chariot, the 72 gods took shape, and they took shape so that they might rule over the 72 languages of the peoples. And by that throne, he created other serpent-like angels called seraphim, which praise him at all times. I'll try just to read it a little bit more. Thereafter, he created a congregation or ecclesia of angels, thousands of myriads, numberless, which resembled the congregation in the 8th heaven, and a firstborn called Israel, which is the man that sees God. And another being called Jesus Christ, who resembles the Savior, above in the 8th heaven, and who sits at his right upon a revered throne, and at his left there sits the Virgin of the Holy Spirit upon a throne and glorifying him. And the 7 virgins stand before him, possessing 30 harps and psalteries and trumpets, glorifying him. And all the armies of the angels glorify him, and they bless him. Now where he sits is upon a throne of light within a great cloud that covers him. And there was no one with him in the cloud except Sophia, the daughter of Pistis, instructing him about all the things that exist in the 8th heaven, so that the likeness of those things might be created, in order that his reign might endure until the consumptions of heaven and chaos and their forces. Now Pistis Sophia set him up. Okay, all right. Something just hit me, but let me just keep on reading. Now Pistis Sophia set him apart from the darkness and summoned him to her right, and the prime parent she put at her left. Okay. Since that day, let me read that again. Now Pistis Sophia set him apart from the darkness and summoned him to her right. Remember, she's in her light. And the prime parent she put at her left. Since that day, right has been called justice and left called wickedness. All right. Now, yeah, and you'll find this in, various religions. All right. Now, because of this, they all received a realm, cosmos, and the congregation of justice and wickedness stand upon a creature all. Thus, when the prime parent of chaos saw his son Sabaoth and the glory that he was in, and perceived that he was the greatest of all authorities of chaos, what? He envied him. Of course he did. And having become wrathful, he engendered death out of his death, and he was established over the 6th heaven. For Sabaoth had been snatched up from there, and thus the number of the 6 authorities of chaos was achieved. Then death, being androgynous, mingled with his own nature and begot 7 androgynous offspring. These are the names of the male ones. Let me read that again. Thus, when the prime parent of chaos, Yaldabaoth, saw his son Sabaoth and the glory that he was in, for recognizing the truth, and being glad to hear it, and perceived that he was the greatest of all the authorities of chaos, he envied him, and having become wrathful, he engendered death out of his death. And he, death, was established over the sixth heaven. Death was established over the sixth heaven. For Sabaoth had been snatched up from there. And thus the number of the six authorities of chaos was achieved. Then death, being androgynous, mingled with his own nature and begot 7 androgynous offspring. These are the names of the male ones: jealousy, wrath, tears, sighing, suffering, lamentation, bitter weeping. And these are the names of the female ones: wrath, pain, lust, sighing, curse, bitterness, quarrelsomeness. They had intercourse with one another, and each one begot 7, so that they might amount to 49 androgynous demons. Their names and their effects you will find in the book of Solomon. And in the presence of these, Zoe, who was with Sabaoth, created 7 good androgynous forces. These are the names of the male ones: the unenvious, the blessed, the joyful, the true, the unbegrudging, the beloved, the trustworthy. Also, as regards the female ones, these are their names: peace, gladness, rejoicing, blessedness, truth, love, faith, or pistis. And from these there are many good and innocent spirits. Their influences and their effects you will find in the configurations of the fate of heaven that is beneath the 12. And having seen the likeness of Pistis in the waters, the prime parent grieved very much, especially when he heard her voice, like the first voice that had called to him out of the waters. And when he knew that it was she who had given a name to him, he sighed. He was ashamed on account of his transgression. And when he had come to know in truth that an immortal man of light had been existing before him, he was greatly disturbed. For he had previously said to all the gods and their angels, "It is I who am God. No other one exists apart from me." For he had been afraid that they might know that another had been in existence before him and might condemn him. But he, being devoid of understanding, scoffed at the condemnation and acted recklessly. Acted a fool. He said, "If anything has existed before me, let it appear, so that we may see its light." And immediately, behold, light came out of the 8th heaven and above, and passed through all the heavens of the earth. When the prime parent saw that the light was beautiful as it radiated, he was amazed, and he was greatly ashamed. As that light appeared, a human likeness appeared within it, very wonderful. And no one saw it except for the prime parent and Pronoia, who was with him. Yet its light appeared to all the forces of heavens. Because of this, what? They were all troubled by it. I'm going to stop there. Or should I? Read a few more. Then when Pronoia saw that emissary, she became enamored of him, but he hated her because she was on the darkness. But she desired to embrace him, and she was not able to. When she was unable to assuage her love, she poured out her light upon the earth. Since that day, the emissary has been called Adam of Light, whose rendering is the luminous man of blood. And the earth spread over him holy Adaman, whose rendering is the holy land of Adamantine. Since that day, all the authorities have honored the blood of the Virgin, and the earth was purified on account of the blood of the Virgin. But most of all, the water was purified through the likeness of Pistis Sophia, who had appeared to the prime parent in the waters. Justly then it has been said through the waters, the holy water, since it vivifies the all, purifies it. Out of that first blood, Eros appeared, being androgynous. His masculinity is Hemeraris, or hemeros, being fire from the light, his femininity, that is with him a soul of blood is from the stuff of pronoia. He is very lovely in his beauty, having a charm beyond all the creatures of chaos. Then all the gods and their angels, when they beheld Eros, became enamored of him. And appearing in all of them, he set them afire, just as from a single lamp many lamps are lit, and the one and the same light is there, but the lamp is not diminished. And in this way, Eros became dispersed in all the created beings of chaos, and was not diminished. Just as from the midpoint of light and darkness, Eros appeared at the midpoint of the angels and mankind. The sexual union of Eros was consummated. So out of the earth, the primal pleasure blossomed. The woman followed earth, and marriage followed woman. Birth followed marriage. Dissolution followed birth. After that, Eros, the grapevine, sprouted up out of that blood which had been shed over the earth. Because of this, those who drink of it conceive the desire of sexual union. Eros. After the grapevine, a fig tree and a pomegranate tree sprouted up from the earth, together with the rest of the trees, all species having within them their seed from the seed of the authorities and their angels. Then justice created paradise, being beautiful and being outside the orbit of the moon and the orbit of the sun, in the land of wantonness in the east, in the midst of the zones, and desire is in the midst of the beautiful appetizing trees, and the tree of eternal life is as it appeared by God's will. To the north of paradise, so that it might make eternal the souls of pure, who shall come forth from the mottled forms of poverty at the consummation of the age. All right. Just a little bit more. Now the color of the tree of life is like the sun, and its branches are beautiful. Its leaves are like those of the cypress. Its fruit is like a bunch of grapes when it is white. Its height goes as far as heaven, and next to it is the tree of acquaintance, or gnosis, having the strength of God. Its glory like the moon when fully radiant, and its branches are beautiful. Its leaves are like fig leaves, its fruit like a good appetizing date. And this tree is to the north of paradise, so that it might arouse the souls from the torpor of the demons, in order that they might approach the tree of life and eat of its fruit, and so condemn the authorities and their angels. I am going to stop here, honey. All right. This is a lot to go. But I have 3 parts. All right. I'll know where I'm stopping here. All right. This is fun. I love these religious texts, honey. They're so just drama. They're so dramatic, all right? The human condition, that which it is, all right? All right. Humans, angels, all of it. Dramatic stuff. All right. Anyway, thank y'all for joining. Y'all be blessed. Peace.